واقف.
ظل واقف. استمع إلى قرار المحكمة واقفا.
اسمع القرارات.
إي واقفا، كن واقفا.
لا قاعد.
أوقف. وقفوا.
جالس.
Imagine a poor village boy who becomes one of the world's most feared dictators. A man who builds palaces while his people suffer. A leader who starts wars that kill millions yet believes he's a hero. This is the incredible true story of Saddam Hussein. A tale of power, betrayal, and ultimate downfall that changed the Middle East forever. Our story begins in 1937 in a tiny village called Al-Awja, near the city of Tikrit in Iraq. Picture this. Mud huts with no electricity, no running water, and barely any food. In one of these poor homes, a baby was born who would one day shake the entire world. His name was Saddam Hussein. But Saddam's life started with tragedy. His father died before he was even born. Can you imagine? A baby coming into the world without ever meeting his dad. His mother, Subha, was so heartbroken that she tried to end her pregnancy. She didn't want this child. When baby Saddam was born, his mother was too depressed to care for him properly. At just 3 years old, little Saddam was sent away to live with his uncle in Baghdad, Iraq's capital city. But life got worse when he returned home later. His stepfather, Ibrahim, was a cruel man who beat Saddam regularly. Sometimes he would hit him just to wake him up in the morning. Imagine starting every day being beaten by the person who was supposed to protect you. When Saddam turned 10, he made a brave decision that would change his life forever. He ran away from home and went back to his uncle, Khairallah Talfa, in Baghdad. This uncle was different. He became like a real father to Saddam, but he also filled the boy's head with dangerous ideas about Arab nationalism and hatred for foreign countries, especially Britain and America. Saddam's uncle had fought against the British in 1941 and spent 5 years in prison for it. Every night, he would tell young Saddam stories about fighting foreign enemies and how Arabs needed to unite against the Western world. These bedtime stories weren't about princes and princesses. They were about war, revenge, and power. As a teenager in Baghdad, Saddam attended a school that taught him to love his Arab heritage and hate foreign influence. He wasn't the smartest student, but he was ambitious. He dreamed of becoming someone important, someone powerful. In 1957, when Saddam was just 20 years old, he made a decision that would define his entire life. He joined a political party called the Baath Party. The word Baath means rebirth in Arabic. The party wanted all Arab countries to unite into one big nation, free from foreign control. For a young man who had grown up hearing stories about fighting foreigners, this sounded perfect. But joining the Baath Party wasn't just about attending meetings and giving speeches. These people were serious revolutionaries. They were willing to kill for their cause. And in 1959, they asked 22-year-old Saddam to prove his loyalty in the most extreme way possible. The plan was simple but deadly. Assassinate Iraq's Prime Minister, Abdul Karim Qasim. Qasim refused to join with other Arab countries, and the Baath Party wanted him dead. On October 7th, 1959, Saddam and other party members waited on Al-Rashid Street in Baghdad with guns hidden under their clothes. But everything went wrong. Saddam was supposed to just provide backup, but he got excited and started shooting too early. The assassination failed. Qasim's driver died, and the Prime Minister was wounded but survived. Saddam himself was shot in the leg during the chaos. Most of the assassins were caught and executed, but Saddam escaped. First, he fled to Syria, then to Egypt. For the next 4 years, he lived in Cairo, protected by Egypt's president, Gamal Abdel Nasser. During this time, Saddam finished high school and even tried to study law. But he was always planning his return to Iraq. In 1963, the Ba'ath Party successfully overthrew the Iraqi government, and Saddam returned home as a hero. But politics in Iraq was like a deadly game of musical chairs. Later that same year, the Ba'ath Party was thrown out of power, and Saddam was arrested and thrown in prison. Prison might break most people, but it made Saddam stronger and more determined. Even behind bars, he continued organizing Ba'ath Party activities. In 1966, he managed to escape from prison, a skill that would serve him well later in life. The Baath party recognized Saddam's talents as an organizer and his complete loyalty to the cause. They promoted him to Deputy Secretary of the Regional Command. Saddam used this position to build his own network of supporters and create a security service that answered only to him. In 1968, opportunity knocked again. The Baath party launched another coup, this time successfully. A man named Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr became president of Iraq, and Saddam became vice president. Al-Bakr was older and more experienced, but Saddam was younger, hungrier, and more ruthless. For the next 11 years, Saddam worked as vice president, but he was really the power behind the throne. While al-Bakr gave speeches and met with foreign diplomats, Saddam was busy building his control over every aspect of Iraqi society. Here's where Saddam's story becomes complicated. From 1968 to 1979, he did some genuinely good things for Iraq. He used the country's oil wealth to build hospitals, schools, and roads. He created free healthcare and education systems that were among the best in the Arab world. He even supported women's rights, encouraging girls to go to school and women to work outside the home. Iraq's oil industry was controlled by foreign companies, mainly British ones. In 1972, Saddam led the effort to nationalize these companies, meaning the Iraqi government took control of its own oil. This decision made Iraq incredibly wealthy, especially after oil prices skyrocketed in 1973. With all this money, Saddam transformed Iraq's cities. Baghdad became a modern capital with wide boulevards, impressive government buildings, and beautiful parks. To many Iraqis, especially those living in cities, life was getting better. But there was a dark side to Saddam's modernization. He created a secret police force that watched everyone. Teachers, doctors, even children were encouraged to report on anyone who criticized the government. People who spoke against Saddam or the Baath party simply disappeared in the middle of the night. Saddam also began developing chemical weapons during this time. He told people it was for defense against Iraq's enemies. But these weapons would later be used against Iraqi citizens. By 1979, Saddam was tired of being second in command. President al-Bakr was getting old and wanted to unite Iraq with Syria, which would have reduced Saddam's power. Saddam couldn't let that happen. On July 16, 1979, Saddam forced al-Bakr to resign, claiming the old man was sick and needed to retire. At 42 years old, Saddam Hussein became the president of Iraq. But he wasn't taking any chances with potential rivals. Just 5 days after becoming president, Saddam called a meeting of all top Baath party officials. What happened next was like something from a horror movie. Saddam stood at the podium, smoking a cigar, as an official read out a list of 68 names. As each name was called, that person was arrested and dragged from the room. The remaining party members were terrified. They didn't know if their names would be called next. To make them complicit in his actions, Saddam forced some of the surviving members to join the firing squads that executed 22 of the arrested officials. This wasn't just about eliminating enemies. It was about making sure everyone had blood on their hands. Within his first month as president, Saddam had executed hundreds of potential rivals. The message was clear: absolute loyalty to Saddam or death. There was no middle ground. Saddam's biggest mistake came just 1 year after he became president. In 1979, a religious revolution in neighboring Iran brought Ayatollah Khomeini to power. Khomeini preached that Islamic governments should replace secular ones throughout the Middle East. This was a direct threat to Saddam's rule. Iraq had a population that was about 60% Shia Muslim, the same type of Islam that had taken over Iran. But Saddam and his supporters were Sunni Muslims, a minority in Iraq. Saddam feared that Iran's revolution would inspire Iraq's Shia population to rebel against him. Instead of trying to make peace, Saddam decided to attack first. On September 22, 1980, Iraqi forces invaded Iran. Saddam thought the war would be quick and easy. Iran's military was in chaos after their revolution, and Saddam believed his modern army would win within weeks. He was wrong. Terribly wrong. The Iran-Iraq war lasted 8 brutal years. It was like World War I all over again, with soldiers fighting from trenches and dying by the thousands for just a few miles of territory. Both sides used chemical weapons. Young boys, some as young as 12, were sent to walk through minefields to clear the way for adult soldiers. The war consumed Iraq's economy. All the oil money that had been used to build hospitals and schools now bought bullets and bombs. Instead of creating a better life for Iraqis, Saddam's war brought only death and poverty. By 1988, when the war finally ended in a stalemate, over 1 million people were dead. Iraq was bankrupt, owing billions of dollars to other countries. Saddam had gained nothing from this war except the knowledge that he could convince his people to die for him. After the Iran war ended, Saddam faced a huge problem: how to pay for rebuilding Iraq. The country owed money to everyone, especially to Kuwait, the small oil-rich nation to Iraq's south. During the war with Iran, Kuwait had loaned Iraq billions of dollars. Now they wanted their money back. But Saddam had a different idea. He claimed that Kuwait was historically part of Iraq and that they had been stealing Iraqi oil by drilling diagonally under the border. On August 2nd, 1990, Iraqi tanks rolled into Kuwait City. Within 2 days, Saddam had conquered the entire country. He thought the world would complain, but ultimately do nothing, just like when he had used chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers and Kurdish civilians. This time, Saddam miscalculated completely. Kuwait was friends with powerful countries, especially the United States. Within days, a coalition of 35 countries, led by the United States, began preparing to drive Iraq out of Kuwait. For months, the world gave Saddam chances to withdraw peacefully. The United Nations passed resolution after resolution demanding that Iraq leave Kuwait. Economic sanctions were imposed, cutting off Iraq's oil sales and imports of food and medicine. Saddam refused to budge. He believed his army, battle-hardened from 8 years of war with Iran, could defeat any enemy. He built up the invasion as a battle between the Arab world and Western imperialism. On January 17th, 1991, the coalition attacked. What followed was one of the most one-sided military defeats in history. Coalition forces, using smart bombs and advanced technology, destroyed Iraqi forces in just 42 days. Iraq's air force was eliminated, its navy was sunk, and its army retreated in chaos. The highway from Kuwait back to Iraq became known as the Highway of Death, as coalition aircraft destroyed fleeing Iraqi vehicles. The war was so one-sided that some people compared it to a video game rather than real combat. The Gulf War defeat should have ended Saddam's rule, but somehow he survived. As soon as the war ended, revolts broke out across Iraq. In the south, Shia Muslims rebelled. In the north, Kurdish people declared independence. For a moment, it looked like Saddam's regime might collapse. Rebel forces captured major cities. Saddam's own generals were abandoning him. But the coalition forces, having achieved their goal of liberating Kuwait, decided not to help the rebels overthrow Saddam. This decision haunted Iraq for the next 12 years. Saddam brutally crushed the rebellions, using helicopter gunships and chemical weapons against his own people. Thousands of Iraqis who had dared to rise up against him were executed or simply disappeared. The United Nations imposed strict sanctions on Iraq, hoping to pressure Saddam to comply with weapons inspections and stop developing dangerous weapons. These sanctions were supposed to hurt Saddam and his government, but they ended up causing terrible suffering for ordinary Iraqi people. For 12 years, Iraq lived under these sanctions. Children died from diseases that could have been easily treated if proper medicines had been available. The middle class disappeared as professionals fled the country. Iraq's infrastructure crumbled as spare parts for power plants, water treatment facilities, and hospitals couldn't be imported. But Saddam lived in luxury. While his people suffered, he built more palaces, over 80 by some counts. He commissioned giant statues of himself and murals showing him as a great Arab leader. His sons, Uday and Qusay, lived like princes, terrorizing anyone who crossed them. Everything changed on September 11th, 2001. When terrorists attacked the United States, the American government decided that dictators like Saddam were too dangerous to leave in power. President George W. Bush labeled Iraq as part of an axis of evil, along with Iran and North Korea. The Americans claimed that Saddam was developing weapons of mass destruction and supporting terrorist groups. UN weapons inspectors returned to Iraq in 2002, but found little evidence of active weapons programs. However, Saddam's past use of chemical weapons and his refusal to fully cooperate with inspectors made him seem guilty. On March 17, 2003, President Bush gave Saddam 48 hours to leave Iraq or face invasion. Saddam, who had survived so many previous challenges, refused to back down. He probably thought this would be another limited war like 1991, where he could survive by hiding until the Americans got tired and went home. On March 20, 2003, the invasion began. This time, the goal wasn't just to defeat Iraq's army, it was to completely remove Saddam from power. Unlike in 1991, there would be no ceasefire that left Saddam in control. The invasion was swift. American and British forces used advanced technology to destroy Iraqi resistance. By April 9, 2003, Baghdad had fallen. The famous video of Saddam's statue being pulled down in Firdaus Square became a symbol of his regime's end. But Saddam himself had vanished. For 8 months, Saddam Hussein played the most important game of hide-and-seek in history. The American military launched Operation Red Dawn, offering a $25 million reward for information leading to his capture. Saddam moved from safe house to safe house, always staying near his hometown of Tikrit, where tribal loyalties ran deep. He communicated through a network of trusted relatives and bodyguards. Occasionally, he released audio recordings, encouraging Iraqis to resist the American occupation. His sons weren't as careful. On July 22, 2003, American forces tracked Ordeh and Qusay to a house in Mosul. After a fierce gun battle, both of Saddam's sons were killed. This was a huge blow to Saddam, both personally and practically, as his sons had been key figures in his security network. The noose was tightening. American forces captured more and more of Saddam's associates, each arrest providing new clues about his whereabouts. They developed detailed maps showing his network of supporters and safe houses. Finally, on December 13, 2003, acting on information from a captured associate, American soldiers surrounded a small farmhouse near Ad Dawa, close to Tikrit. They searched the property but found nothing. Then, one soldier noticed something odd about the ground near a small hut. Hidden under a styrofoam lid covered with bricks and dirt was a narrow hole, barely big enough for a person. At the bottom of this spider hole, they found Saddam Hussein. The man who had once commanded one of the world's largest armies was pulled from his hiding place looking like a homeless person. His hair was long and grey, his beard unkempt. He was dirty and disoriented. The soldiers later said he looked more like a crazy hermit than a former dictator. Saddam had $750,000 in cash with him, along with a pistol. But when American soldiers pointed their weapons at him, he raised his hands and said, "I am Saddam Hussein. I am the president of Iraq and I want to negotiate." There would be no negotiations. Saddam's trial became one of the most watched legal proceedings in history. The Iraqi government, supported by the United States, created a special court called the Iraqi High Tribunal to try him for crimes against humanity. The trial began on October 19, 2005, nearly 2 years after his capture. Saddam appeared in court wearing a dark suit, looking much more like his old self than the disheveled man pulled from the spider hole. But Saddam hadn't changed on the inside. He was still defiant, still convinced he was the rightful president of Iraq. He refused to recognize the court's authority, calling it a puppet of the American occupation. He frequently interrupted proceedings, arguing with judges and making political speeches. The trial focused on one specific crime: the massacre of 148 Shia men and boys in the village of Dujail in 1982. After an assassination attempt against Saddam in Dujail, his security forces had arrested hundreds of villagers. Many were tortured, and 148 were executed after sham trials. This was just one of many massacres during Saddam's rule, but it provided a clear example of his crimes against humanity. Witnesses testified about the torture and executions. Documents signed by Saddam authorizing the killings were presented as evidence. Throughout the trial, Saddam's lawyers argued that he had been a legitimate head of state fighting against terrorists and traitors. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. On November 5th, 2006, Saddam Hussein was found guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced to death by hanging. When the verdict was read, he shouted, "Long live the people! God is great!" Saddam's lawyers appealed the verdict. But on December 26, 2006, an Iraqi appeals court upheld the death sentence. Under Iraqi law, the execution had to take place within 30 days. The Iraqi government chose December 30th, 2006 for the execution. Ironically, this was the first day of Eid al-Adha, one of the most important holidays in Islam. Some criticized this timing as unnecessarily provocative, especially toward Iraq's Sunni population. At approximately 6 a.m. local time, in a room at Camp Justice, an Iraqi military base in Baghdad, Saddam Hussein was hanged. He was 69 years old. Even at the end, Saddam remained defiant. Witnesses said he showed no fear as he was led to the gallows. When asked if he had any last words, he reportedly said, "There is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger." An unauthorized video of the execution, recorded on a cell phone, was later leaked to the internet. It showed Saddam being taunted by his executioners, some of whom shouted the name of a Shia religious leader. This video caused controversy and showed that even in death, Saddam remained a divisive figure. Saddam Hussein's story ended on that December morning in 2006, but his impact on Iraq and the Middle East continues to this day.